Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And today we have another incredible guest, actually 2 incredible guests today that is uncommon. One is Charlie, my wife. This is a historic moment. We got her on a podcast. And then also Jamie Hess, who's joining us all the way over from New York. So thank you so much for being here. Just if you haven't met Jamie Hess, I met her actually about a month ago at a conference where she spoke, and I was completely blown away. Her mind and my mind seemed like, at least in one area, which is what we're going to be talking about today, are in complete agreement around gratitude and the ability to change your entire life based off of this one little thing, one little habit or choice or belief that you choose into. So who is Jamie Hess, you might be asking? Well, she's a media personality. She's the daughter of an extremely world-renowned, probably media personality. Also, she's the creator of the NYC Fit Fam on Instagram. She's a podcaster, 10X speaker, keynote speaker, TEDx. I might have said 10X, but you should be on the 10X.
It's okay.
page.
You know what? We 10X'd it too, so I'm all good with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Her program is the bigaskmethod.com, and you're gonna want to remember that and reach out to her after and just get involved in what she's doing, because it's a life-changing. Which is why I invited her on the podcast, because I like life-changing individuals and I want to rub shoulders with as many as possible. So Jamie, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your childhood upbringing. How did you get to where you are today? And why are you so passionate about the Big Ask Method? And, more importantly, gratitude specifically. How does that affect your life and how did that come to be?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thanks for asking that. When I talk about gratitude, there's a word that I actually trademarked. It's called Gratitudology. And I really believe in the study of and practice of gratitude in a deep way. And I'll tell you how I kind of got there. I love kind of starting with this mic drop moment because people probably don't expect it in my history. But let's just say this. I was never supposed to be a drug addict. That was not how the stars seemed to have aligned for me early on in my life, but that is where I ended up. But early in my life, that was not where I was headed. Like you had mentioned, I was brought up in a very loving family in the 80s, and my mom is TV journalist Joan London. So she hosted Good Morning America for almost 20 years. So suffice it to say, I just wasn't supposed to go that direction. My mom was America's mom. She was known as, as American as apple pie, and just, we were out there kind of we were a representation of that. So as her kids, I was very much brought up on the set. It was not uncommon to find me being held by someone like Sammy Davis Jr. during a commercial break, or chatting with Henry Kissinger, or, whatever the day would bring. I really grew up on the Good Morning America set. But as I mentioned, Sam, when you heard me speak, I have to ask the audience this. Have you ever had somebody that you looked up to so much that you knew that they should be an inspiration? Like you look up to them and you're like, wow, I should really be getting inspired by this person. And it should make me want to reach higher and dream bigger. But it almost feels so unattainable that you kind of just want to run from it. You're like, that could never be me. And you just want to go the other direction and hide. That's kind of how I felt, to be perfectly honest. My mom was kind of this larger than life icon. And I just had this sense of not enoughness growing up. And I think it was just in my soul for whatever reason. I think it's very common in humans, especially in young teenage girls. And I ran from it. As I was trying to kind of find my way out of the shadow of my mom's light and become my own person, I sunk deeper into my own shadows. And what ended up happening was I became very susceptible to kind of falling in with the wrong crowd. I grew up in the 90s. That's when I hit my teens. And if anybody was a teenager in the 90s, you may be familiar with the rave scene and the underground rave scene, as it were, in the 90s. Let me tell you, it was a fun time. She was a fun time, pointing to myself, but it was also a very scary time if you were a susceptible type of person, as I was. So my drug experimentation got pretty bad pretty fast. And, they say with drug addiction, it's fun, and then it's fun with problems, and then it's just problems. And it's like, once you get to that problems phase, you're kind of screwed. You can't really go back. You can't recapture the early times. And once I had hit that, I was kind of tumbling through at that point, the end of high school. I made it through college. I went to NYU, and I landed in my first job in public relations. By the way, I always knew what I wanted to do. I was in my soul, I wanted to be a public relations professional. I didn't really know what that meant, but I was a writer. I was a connector. I was very social. I was an event planner. And so I didn't know at the time, but all those things together, when you put together those sensibilities, that kind of is what PR is. And so I was very good at that job, and I was able to keep my head above water even through my drug use for quite some time. And PR really lends itself to, as they said in the 90s, champagne and cocaine and models and bottles and all of these things that seem very glamorous until they destroy your entire life. You know what I mean? So I kind of tumbled through all of that, but it just, with drugs, it doesn't get better. You can ignore it for as long as you want and think, oh, I'm just going to kind of find my way out of this or grow out of it. But it just doesn't really work like that. And eventually it went from bad to worse. And I remember this defining moment where, I was a high functioning addict. So I had this really like high level job, and I would get dressed and go to this fancy office tower every day. And people thought on the outside, man, she's really kicking butt. But on the inside, I knew the truth. And one day I was sitting, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the side of my bed, like bolt upright, because my alarm was going off. And I was looking at this alarm clock because I had not been to sleep yet. And it was just this moment where I was like, you did it again. And now you have to put on this costume and go to work and pretend to be normal. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. And I realized we're only as sick as our secrets. Like, this was my secret, and it was going to gnaw me from the inside out and destroy me. And that was the day I reached out and I asked for help. And that was the first day of the rest of my life. But in that moment, two things happened. Maybe not in that moment. Over the next, like, maybe 90 days to 6 months, as I started getting my sea legs under me, two things happened. The first thing, this is pretty common to people in early recovery, I kind of like discovered wellness. I was like, oh, God, I have a lot of extra time on my hands. Maybe I'll get fit. Maybe I'll kind of look into that. So I started dropping into places like Barry's Boot Camp and Soul Cycle, like all of those boutique fitness spots that had become very trendy in like the 2000s. And I realized, kind of embarrassingly, I was like, oh my gosh, everything I've been searching for on the dance floor is literally right here. Like, I found this communal, tribal energy and everyone moving to the shared beat. And like, it was so fun. And I was like, oh my God, everything I was searching for was actually here all along. So I fell in love with wellness, and I started that Instagram account, NYC Fit Fam. So put a pin in that, because I'll come back to it, because that literally becomes the portal to the rest of my life. But the second thing that happened was I was doing the other things that you do in early recovery. Like, I got a sponsor and all of the things that I was going to meetings, all the things you're supposed to do. And my sponsor was telling me things that literally I had never heard before, like, have an attitude of gratitude, and like, you're not the victim. I was like, what do you mean? Like, the world is wrong. Like, this, I'm the one who has it hard. And she's like, you have to keep your own side of the street clean, girl. Like, that's actually, you have accountability in things. And I started seeing things through a different lens. I started putting on my big girl panties, as they say, and showing up and seeing my part in things and becoming grateful. But I was kind of only half doing the work, and I wasn't really getting the gratitude thing. Like, I would pretend, because I love to get an A+. You know what I mean? I love to get a gold star. I'd be like, oh, I'm grateful. But I wasn't really waking up every day and understanding, like, you almost died. And if you don't even get that, if you don't wake up every day being so grateful for this life that God gave you, like, you're really missing the point. And because that gratitude didn't really sink in, I ended up relapsing. And I found that, they talk about rock bottom, like in the movies. I found that my bottom had a trap door. I fell right through it, and things went from bad to worse. And I really came back on my knees. And at that point, I was surrendered and I was willing to do anything. And I was like, I am grateful to be here. What do I need to do? And I started showing up in the right way. At that time, everything started changing. And I all of a sudden became a different person just by doing this personal work on myself. It started showing up also for me professionally. Like I had not gotten any new accreditations or done anything particularly different. But I started getting promoted and my job kept getting bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden I'm like, I'm SVP at this big agency. And it's really just as a byproduct of showing up as a different human. So I'm at this PR agency, and this is kind of where the story takes the turn, which is a kind of fun byproduct of just doing the personal work when you can start to help others. I saw the people around me, my colleagues, were largely miserable. And I mean that like it just in the way that a lot of corporate America just thinks is normal in the United States. You know what I mean? Like they're just burnt out. They're just like kind of like, am I aligned with my purpose? I don't really know. Who has time to even question that? I don't really have time to take care of myself. I was living in New York at the time. Now I live in Pennsylvania, but I was living in New York at the time for the last 2 decades. I live between, New York and Pennsylvania now, but my home's in Pennsylvania. But in New York, man, that hustle culture, the person who sends the latest email wins. Like you get the award. If you're in the office at 10 o'clock at night, it's like, wow, you're hardcore. And that's not healthy. And so I started kind of coaching my colleagues, like one by one, I would just try to help them pull themselves out of the trenches of this. And I realized my power to serve, and I realized that being of service is the best way. Like paying it forward is really how it comes back to you. It's that kind of inspiration boomerang. And my sponsor used to always tell me, we can only keep what we have by giving it away. And I love that. And once I realized that my greatest power was in helping other people see this message, which was really about gratitude, being of service, seeing life through a lens that just kind of shines everything up. I started realizing that was my true calling. And NYC Fit Fam became my portal to that as an Instagram influencer. I was a young burgeoning influencer. That platform started to grow. My message started to resonate. And I ended up, after a couple of years of growing this message on Instagram, I was able to leave that corporate job and kind of shatter that proverbial glass ceiling. And today I am an Instagram influencer, media personality. I'm on all the talk shows and I'm on a lot of different TV shows just about every day, talking about fitness, wellness, and mindset. And like you said, I'm also a keynote speaker and a TEDx speaker and a coach. And I coach people in both wellness and personal development. And it's really that underpinning of gratitude that is my core message.
So before we move on, because I want to get into this really quickly. First, if you're watching on Facebook, you're live and we're watching this live. So if you have questions for her after what you just heard, you can post your questions in the comments. We'll read them and then maybe we'll ask them if you ask them while we're still on the air. Second question though, I want, before we dive into some of these other questions, go into some of the psychology or like the actual chemistry aspect of gratitude and why that is. Like, what about that is so powerful?
It's so funny. We didn't even have like the area of positive psychology until a man named Dr. Martin Seligman introduced it. He has something called the PERMA model that he introduced to the American Psychological Association. Prior to that, we had only looked at mental illness, like as a country, as a world. And he was like, whoa. Can we just like shapeshift this a little bit and actually look at what if we focused on what makes the happiest people the happiest, right? And the PERMA model, PERMA, he has 5 areas. I won't go into all of them right now because you could look it up, Google it. It's very interesting. But it has a lot to do with engagement and relationships and the things that we do that kind of give us that sense of gratitude and happiness in life. And so I really focus on 3 core pillars. My model is ask, become, connect. I encourage people first, and this would naturally be intuitively the first thing you would really do if you were looking to personally develop and take a look at where you're at and where you want to go. Ask yourself, who do I want to show up as? And I mean, really, because so many of us how often do people as adults just find that they're going to work to make the money, to go home, to have a beer, to play a little ball with the kids and to go to sleep. And they get up and they do it again, or maybe if you're younger, to go out on the weekends And, if you're like me, to get hammered, forget what you did, not even really know if you had fun and go back to work on Monday. Like, that's not a life lived in depth. Who do you want to show up as your highest self? What does that look like? And so I help people do the work around that. The next pillar, become, is really about sweeping away the junk that's keeping you from getting there. So I talk about a lot of gratitude backed exercises that help us get there. And it's really just about, I told a parable, Sam, you might remember, there's a parable about an old Cherokee Indian, and he's sitting with his grandson. And he said, grandson, we all have a great battle going on inside us between two wolves. And one wolf represents all that is good, happiness and humility and all those great things. And then the other wolf is like all that is bad, like lust and jealousy and all those things. And the grandson thinks about this. He's like, wow, what's going on in everyone? Well, grandfather, which wolf will win? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. And that's an everyday battle inside. Which wolf are you feeding? And that even just comes down to, how are you talking to yourself? 9/10 of the women I coach, they have all the tools they need I coach a lot of women that going from 6 to 7, they want to go from 6-figure earners to 7-figure earners. And like, they have everything they need to get there, except for the confidence. Except like, they'll get halfway through a project and just give up because they're like, I couldn't possibly see it through. And it's like, if you tell yourself every day you can't, then you can't. You're right. So it's a lot about how we talk to ourselves every single day. Same as if you want to build your arms, by the way, you want muscles, you got to work your biceps in the gym. If you want to build positive neural pathways, you got to do positive neural work in your psyche, affirmations, all of that good stuff to believe. And then the last one is connect, because I truly believe, we have an epidemic of loneliness. It's been written about a lot lately in the papers. In the UK, they actually have a minister of loneliness. I don't know if you know that. It's a government position. It's very, very dangerous how we're trying to live in a vacuum these days, especially with the digital world. We feel like we're connected, but we're not really. So connectivity, accountability, not trying to do things in a vacuum. Even a lot of people who work for a company today feel like they're solopreneurs because they're just working from home or hybrid. So people are they're very disconnected. So I really, really make a case for connectivity with other human beings and using that to, like, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? We got to be out there. We are meant to be connected creatures and to give back and to help each other and to ask for help. You deserve to ask for help. So this all kind of ladders back to gratitude, but you can see how you can get yourself from step A to step, or, A, B, C in a way that's kind of linear, and it can change everything.
It's funny. I agree, like, conceptually with everything that you're saying, and Sam has shared some of these things with me. And a question I have is, and I'm going to be like pretty vulnerable here.
Yeah, do it.
We have 3 kids, and I have struggled with postpartum depression, anxiety, mainly with the first 2. The third one's been a lot better. But because when you said, when you're not waking up every day being just grateful that you're here, then you're missing something. But for me, like, there's a lot of days I'm definitely not waking up like that.
Yeah.
And with my second son, I was probably suicidal for like 18 months. Like, every day thought about it as an option for like 18 months. So what would be your advice to somebody like me when you really don't actually want to be here?
Yeah.
And you're like, I really just don't want to be doing anything that I'm responsible to do. Yeah. And it's not like a job I can quit, Yeah,
absolutely.
How do you still go about your day trying to think of things you're grateful for when you, and it's still, it sounds so sad, but it's the reality for a lot of women, especially moms like me, when we're like, we really aren't grateful for the day that we have to go through. Like, yep. What would you say?
So, full transparency, I also suffered from postpartum, and I completely understand. And just to be really clear, if there is severe depression, I really recommend going to see a doctor. And I don't know how you guys feel about medication. Everybody has a personal journey, but if there is a So I am a sober individual, which means I don't take anything mood altering, but mood stabilizing is a different story. So there are situations where it might be severe to an extreme where a doctor intervention is needed. Now, secondary to that, what I got to tell you is I get it. Okay. Because in the beginning of my sobriety, I just did not feel grateful. And that's kind of my point. I couldn't get there. I was frustrated with people who could get there. It was annoying to me to go into 12-step meetings and hear people say, like, just have an attitude of gratitude. I wanted to flip them all off, to be perfectly frank. Because I was like, I'm white knuckling it through massive addictive cravings. This is obviously before my kids, which added a whole other layer. Okay. But addiction's a bitch. That was not fun. So I felt that back then. Unfortunately for me, I had to fall completely on my head to get really that really shift in perspective. And I think a lot of people, it takes hitting a bottom to kind of start seeing the upside. Now, it sounds like what you're describing is a form of a bottom. And if you can take it and look at it like that, I'm not saying that every day I jump out of bed. I'm saying that any days, okay? I'm not saying that any days I jump out of bed with gusto, grateful for the life God gave me and the body I'm in and the floor I'm standing on. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But I have a practice, and it is a practice, and I do not want to do it every day the same way I don't want to go to the gym every day. There's a lot of days I don't want to go to the gym. I'd say over 50%, I just drag my ass there. Similarly, I drag my ass into my meditation practice, into my journaling practice, into my morning routine practice, which has 2 gratitude exercises in it that include, written work. It's a little bit of work. But what I can tell you is that what I've noticed about my thinking intuitively, here's an example of how it changed. I'll give you an example. I posted this on my Instagram the other day. It's like my 3rd post over. It's a pinned post. And it's just an example of how you can see your thinking change. I noticed it. And that's why I posted it on Instagram. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is so different. The old me, the normal me, the me that was born in this body. Okay. If I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to work, which I did that day, my brain just wants to just drag me the whole way there. Like as I'm getting dressed, like this sucks. Like I don't even look good. I can't believe I have to go. I can't believe I have to do this. This is really a nightmare. Like I'm driving into work. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't wait to get back in bed. That's me. That is my chemistry. That's how I'm made. That's where I want to go. After doing the gratitude practices that I've been doing for a long enough time where they become ingrained, I found myself the other day, I had woken up and my brain started to do that. And immediately it's like the dial turned back the other way. And all of a sudden I was like, I'm so grateful that I have a job to go to. I'm grateful I'm going to get this paycheck so I can support my family. I'm grateful that I am gainfully employed when others in this country are suffering. I'm grateful I have 2 legs to walk down to the car on. Like all the things started, it didn't have to be big things, right? Coming into my consciousness that gave me joy. As I'm pulling into the parking lot, I'm just feeling uprising and overwhelming of gratitude for the sunrise, for the things that I wouldn't have noticed if I was in my misery. Now, I've trained myself into doing that. And it's not because I'm better than anyone. It's because it's literally a practice the same way my exercise is a practice or anything else. I do believe that all of us can find the things to focus on that we can be grateful for. I don't believe that it's easy. And I do believe that if there's serious depression, it's not as easy as saying, I'm just going to journal. I'm going to manifest it. Because I think that's the problem with a lot of wellness culture today. We really speak in platitudes and we make it seem too easy. And it's not. It is a daily practice, and it also shouldn't be practiced alone. Doing it in a vacuum can be very dangerous. It's really helpful to have an accountability partner because it's not easy to stay on track and make yourself do these things. So doing it with a buddy is part of the work. My husband and I happen to be accountability partners, and we do this work together as if our lives depend on it because they do.
So with that, I'm curious, because I have my own experience very similar to you, and I would say that I'm not as consistent with writing it down at this point in my life. However, when I was starting and realizing I needed to change my mind and the way I viewed the world, it was daily for years. And I would say close to 12 years, like consistent journaling. And when we actually were dating, I gave her all of my journals from when I was 8 years old to was 23 years old and said, hey, here's my life, right? And thankfully I kept journals, but she was able to see me process through all the crap that I had gone through, see how I had programmed my mind, which helped her understand me better. But just because you understand somebody better doesn't mean that it's not in you yet. It's not your neural pathway. You can understand why it's his, but you don't understand how to get it to be yours. So mine I don't know at what point it switched to where it wasn't, I wouldn't say it's required daily for me. Obviously I think I'd be better if I was still doing daily practice, and I've gone back to that more recently. But how long do you feel like you were doing it daily before you were having like more often than not, the automatic, as soon as you started negative, it switched into positive?
So it really happened over time. And I want to be clear, it's not just journaling, right? And it's not just any of the things. It's not just saying, I'm just going to be grateful. Anybody who's tried to do that, who's really coming from a dark place, knows that's hogwash. There are multiple different channels and exercises, more than I could go into on this podcast today, that are going to help you get there. And there's a lot of evidence that prove, like, the more that we sit in our own muck, the worse off we are. So the more that we can have human connections in our community, the more we can force ourselves to do the things that we don't want to do. I'll tell you, I have an assistant that works with me here 2 days a week, and she doesn't have to work with me live. I mean, she could work virtually as easy as she could work here live. The reason I have her here 2 days a week is to force me to get into that mindset, to do those 2 full days of work with her here, communicating with another person live. She doesn't have to be here. I do it because I know that people together with people help people. There's actually a really great book that I would recommend to you, by the way. My co-host of my podcast, Megan Murphy, she's the editor-in-chief of Women's Day magazine. She wrote a book called Your Fully Charged Life. And I'll tell you something about Megan. Megan's negativity bias was so deeply ingrained. She had a nickname in high school. I think they called her like Grump. It was before Grumpy Cat. They called her Grumpy or something with Grumpy in it. She was the most negative person. It was like, oh, you're going to go to summer camp. Oh, it's going to be hot. Oh, you're going to play in the game. I'm probably going to get hit in the face with the ball. The way she tells it, everything that came her way that was good, she found a way to make it bad. So much so that she also suffered with a terrible eating disorder. She was in treatment several times. Terrible actual backstory. Go read her book. It's more than I'll even get into on this episode. She ended up becoming the biggest advocate for the positive psychology movement. And she wrote this book, Your Fully Charged Life, which is essentially how to recharge that battery and plug back into your life based on so many of these mechanisms, and kind of workshopping a lot of these things live. And a lot of them do have to do with actively pursuing things that you don't necessarily want to do, but that are going to refuel that battery for you and really change the way that you think. So I don't want to dumb it down to say that it's just journaling. Journaling is a really great thing that everybody can do every day, but really taking a look at that and really taking a look at what are some of the research, what does it tell us about some of the things we can do to just get out of our own head? Because one thing I learned in recovery is that being in my own head is not a place I should go without adult supervision. It's just not, right? It's not how I'm not wired to be in a good space. So I have to do a lot of work actively. And I think those of us who have to work that much harder at it, by the way, have that much more of an ability to share and to pay it forward. I actually think that's a gift. None of this really came naturally to me, right? And because I had to work so hard to learn it, I think it's kind of helpful because it helps me pay it forward and teach it in a little more of a practical way, because for me, it's a daily practice. My proclivity is to get back in bed and pull the covers over my head. But today, it's just not going down like that.
So when you wake up in one morning and you're like, oh, I just want to go back to sleep. I don't want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I maybe will lay here for like 10 more minutes. How do you, when you recognize you're like, oh, I'm not wanting to get out of bed, is it just like a set of affirmations that you go into? Do you actually get out of bed, or do you stay in bed and meditate in bed? Like, because I find myself doing that where I'm like, I'm not getting out of bed for at least 5 more minutes.
Absolutely. So a couple things. Number one, I am very rigid with my schedule because I have to be. Left to my own devices, I'll screw it up. I just will. So like with the workout has to be planned. I have to sign up for something because otherwise I won't go, right? I am a perfectly imperfect human. Okay. I'm a perfectly imperfect child of God. I will not go. I will lie, right? Like intentionally. I'm not like a jerk, but man, I'll say I'll lie to myself. I'm going to go run 5 miles. If no one's really checking, I'm not going to do it. I got to put my clothes out the night before. I got to sign up for a class at the gym. So my name's on the list. So they're expecting me. So maybe I made a personal investment. I have some skin in the game. Maybe I paid $20. I'm not losing $20, right? So I'm going to show up. But also, if I do find myself on one of those mornings and I'm stuck, two things. Number one, my husband knows. My husband's my accountability partner, and we know each other's shortcomings and each other's fallibilities. I will text him all, and I get vulnerable real fast. I'm having a hard time. I'm having a tough morning. Can I be accountable to you? I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to be downstairs with my hairbrush in 30 minutes. Can I text you when I get there to let you know that I got there? Sometimes I need that help just getting out of bed, right? And that's fair. That's fair. I'm a mom. I'm a professional, but I'm not walking on water here. I'm just a human, right? I'm doing my best. The other thing that's really helpful, I don't know if you're familiar with Mel Robbins' 5-second rule, but literally 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, push those covers off and get the heck out of bed and feel those feet on the floor. Sometimes it's as simple as pushing yourself because, Mel has an entire book. She made a whole book out of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, basically go. And she talks about how your brain can talk yourself out of anything in 5 seconds. But if you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, count it down and get the thing done, and just meaning like get out of bed, get towards putting the leggings on, get towards the gym or whatever the case may be, you got to push yourself to do it. I also do have an entire archive of saved things online that can help me. I have some great, inspirational videos in the form of affirmations, manifestations, and meditations that I will get out of bed and watch, like a 10-minute Mind Valley. I love. There's a bunch of different resources I love. And I use a great app called I Am, which gives me a little prompt with affirmations. I think I have it set, every couple hours. And I got to tell you, like, it changes everything. Lest you think affirmations are silly and woo-woo, there's so much data and white papers on the power biochemically of affirmations. And so just reading an affirmation out loud, I really recommend not just reading it to yourself, getting up, reading it to yourself in the mirror out loud. It can change your thinking, and it can literally change the direction of your day.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited. I've got a few more questions here, but we are going to sign off on Facebook. But just some of the things that you guys are missing, if you aren't actually listening to the full episode, we're going to dig into a little bit more of the research that she did to kind of get to know. She mentioned it here, like actually going and studying and learning this. Just about everybody's a skeptic in the beginning, and it's okay. I think that skeptic, as she said, it's not your natural proclivity to do that. It's something, as you learn, you become different. And with more information, you start to change your behavior because it's the only thing that makes sense at some point, and so that's a benefit. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we're also going to talk about some of the things she said as far as drugs don't get better. We're going to talk about how that applies to every area of your life, not just if you're dealing with drugs or alcohol or something addictive like that, but it could be social media, it could be TV, it could be Netflix, it could be anything. And so we're going to get into more of the details there. And then we're also going to ask, get the answer of, how much time would you have without your addictions? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So if you're interested in the rest of this conversation, then you can find this episode on the Fuel Your Legacy show on anywhere you can download podcasts moving forward. And we'll hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Perfect. Well, we are back at it then. Okay, so let's go back to kind of the beginning where you said you were never supposed to be a drug addict, and then you said that, but that's where you ended up. There's so many people who actually feel like the end of their story is there. They're 25, they're 35, they're 45, and we use the word ended up, and some people think that is the end, which clearly it's not. You've recovered, but how did you change your ending? And talk about that process. I know you've talked about it in general, but like the changing the ending, what's that narrative like to actually move that forward and help people recognize this isn't the end. I don't have to stay here. I can change.
Oh my gosh. I love this question because let me tell you something. So, and I was just talking about this the other day. I saw a girlfriend of mine who was one of my best girlfriends when we were in high school. And I'll never forget sitting in my driveway. We were both in her Jeep and we were 16 and we were doing drugs. And I remember her, she was in tears and she just said, I just know I'm not going to make it to 26. I just know it. I was looking at a post that she made on Facebook yesterday of her two beautiful twin daughters riding in a horse show and this beautiful life that she's living. And I just thought, what we think is our end is not our end. If you had told me that I would have the capability of living any sort of a normal life, and I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see me, I would have said you were crazy. It just wasn't who I was. I was a drug addict. I was a loser in my mind. I was hopeless. It's who I was. That doesn't change overnight. All right. That doesn't change overnight. But there's something that they say, you know, in recovery text, which is just basically if you kind of stick with this way of living, thinking, growing, learning, community, you have a chance to be rocketed into a fourth dimension, a way of life that you never even thought possible. And to say that that's my experience today is the understatement of the year. If you had told me even that I could leave my corporate job and get to a place where I am, you know, self-sustainably, I 5X my salary, I'm self-sustainable, I'm happy and thriving. The fact that I am a suburban mom, okay, this girl who had pink hair and a tongue ring is a suburban mom who belongs to a country club. Like, how did that even happen? I'll tell you how it happens. You know, a lot of hard work and diligence and not allowing myself to stay in that energy of I'm not enough, I'm a loser, I'm flawed, I'm broken. But it took a lot of convincing of myself. So like I said, so much of this comes in taking those small wins, being reflective of them and being like, well, if I could do this, maybe I could do that, right? It's about really taking a step back. This is why I believe so hard in coaching, by the way. And I have always, since I left that job, let me tell you a quick story. When I left that corporate job, I had been working on my side hustle, which was my being a, you know, monetized Instagram influencer and starting this role as a media personality. I've been doing that for about 2 years, nights and weekends, right? Just really working on it on the side. But I was still like a pretty high powered executive. So I was very busy at work. And I would always say to myself, man, imagine if I didn't have this full-time job. Imagine what I could do with this side hustle. Like I could just bring everything into fruition. I would write 10 books. I would have 7 podcasts. I would be coaching. I would be doing all these things. So I finally left that job. I gave notice and here I was on my own. And in the first 90 days, I had all of these things on my vision board. And guess how many projects I got accomplished in the first 90 days? Zero. Big fat goose egg. The reason was because I had always had a boss. I had always had deadlines and deliverables. I did not know how to operate outside of that. I was like, what are my KPIs? When am I supposed to be doing what? I just basically started, have you ever seen that meme that's like, I have 25 tabs open in my brain. One of them's playing music and I don't know which one it is. Like, that's what I felt like every single day. I would open 17 different workflows and I just didn't know what I was doing. So nothing got finished. That was when I hired my first executive coach. And she was kind of like a spiritual life coach, executive coach. She was like a hearty dose of woo-woo and manifestation with like a good underpinning of strategy and prioritization. And she helped me. And I always say, if you don't have a boss, honey, you better hire one, right? Like, yeah, it could be your husband, it could be for free, or it could be somebody that you hire. I've spent over the last year, and I share this publicly, so this is no sort of a flex. This is just my choice. I've spent about $100,000 over the last year in personal development because I was at a point where I had grown my business and I had that liquid. And I said, how do I want to reinvest this, right? Do we want to build a pool? Do I want to buy a bunch of bags and Louboutins? No, we're not buying handbags and shoes around here. We reinvest in the business. And in my business, I am the product. So I reinvested in myself. Personal, professional development, resources to spend against my business in various ways, whether it's masterminds, different things against my personal assets. But it is the best spend I could have made. And this year I'm on track at this point to be about 21% ahead of where I was last year. The business is growing categorically. And that is because I hired help. I changed the ending of my story by hiring people and using resources to help me think bigger. Because left to my own devices, how would I even know? The end to me was the end. I couldn't even fathom this side of life. But as you keep going and you use mentors and you use coaches and you're a seeker, you're seeking informational with people in your industry above you. You're seeking out, help in spiritual areas to further your development there. You have to be a seeker. But the more you try to just sit in your own muck and solve all your problems yourself, that there's a boundary around that. I'm drawing a little periphery with my arms. You're in your own little corral of your own making, right? It's impossible to get out of that without bridges. And those bridges usually come in the form of other humans and help.
So to add that to that though, you the way you were raised was with so much maybe expectation from outside, but a lot of self-imposed for sure expectation to live up to these standards of what other people were. When you were, I guess 2 questions, right? So we're young parents, but when you were going through all of those drugs and everything in the beginning, how aware were your family members that it was even happening? Number one. And then, well, let's just answer that. How aware were they that it was even happening?
My mom was so not a drug person that she just didn't understand what was going on. Bless her heart. It didn't occur to her. She didn't. And then when other mothers would start, like you're a teenager, you get caught at people's houses, she would hear things, but I was a very good liar because when we're in our addiction, we'll do anything to protect our addiction. Now, between you and me and our listeners here, I really wanted to be found out. I actually wanted help, but my addiction just wouldn't let me go there. And so the last time I ever, at the end, when I finally did go to treatment in my 20s, I picked up the phone to call her at least 20 or maybe 30 times. And I dialed the first 3 or 4 numbers of her number. And then I'd hang up. I'd just chicken out because my addiction just couldn't fathom that there could be life without this crutch. I just didn't, this wasn't a good answer. I knew, but I didn't know a better one. I didn't know if I could survive in the real world. So finally she ended up knocking down my door and helping me. Thank God.
Your mom did?
Yeah. So remember I told you I kind of fell through that trap door of my bottom.
Uh-huh.
I got sober myself the first time. After that time I was telling you, I was sitting up on the side of the bed and then I called my friend. He brought me to my first meeting and I got sober, but then I relapsed. And so after that relapse, when I was just at the end of the end, my mom finally came to my house and my apartment in New York City and knocked on my door and said, what is going on and how can I help? Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that was my second question, because again, we're talking specifically about drugs in this context of the conversation, because that was your experience, but there's so many people who are struggling with addictions that are maybe even more widely publicly accepted, right? Like drugs. Yeah. If you're strung out on drugs, it's not like, in certain states it's accepted and promoted now, but let's just talk about like things that are maybe they seem less damaging, but growing up in the house I grew up in, I would much rather receive a physical punishment than a psychological one, because psychological punishment is way worse. And a lot of people are struggling with what I would consider a psychological addiction, depression, anxiety. And I'm not saying that there aren't clinical things there, but a lot of these things we get addicted to that pain of self-harming our spirit and our soul. And it's publicly accepted because it appears as humility. It appears as these things that are really self-deprecating. And so I'm curious, when you're reaching out for help, are you more, were you more scared of losing your addiction, or were you more scared of losing your associations and your friendships and your connections as a result of admitting that you had these addictions?
Yeah. First time around, I just couldn't imagine a life outside of like the club scene. That's how I had all of my validation. It's how where I got my stripes. Like, you live in New York City, you are somebody if you know the DJ and you know the door guy and you get in the club. And I remember my first sponsor actually asking me like, well, what do you like to do outside of that world? And I was like, well, what do you mean? She was like, do you like to go to the beach? Do you like to go to the park? Do you like to go on boats? I was like, I don't know. Who has time? Like, I'm out all night on the weekends and then I'm like recovering. I didn't even know who I was. I had no idea. So I was pretty deep in the beginning. The second time around, when my mom helped me, things had gotten so bad, the party was over. It was just me, myself, and I. And so I was just very much stuck in the, I just thought I needed the crutch of something to make me feel better because I had such a gaping spiritual hole in my soul. And so, drugs are putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. They call it a God-sized hole in recovery. So you got to do the spiritual work to get better. But the point is that I like that you mentioned there's all these other addictions because I talked today. So if you watch my TEDx talk, if you Google like Jamie Hess TEDx, my TEDx talk is actually called Confessions of a Binge Eating Wellness Influencer, because I would say that I relapsed after having my first child. I didn't relapse on drugs, but I relapsed with bulimia, and it got as bad as anything that ever happened on drugs. I mean, just that siren song, that your brain being hijacked by a thought, by an intrusive thought. It was so awful. And whether it's food, which is very difficult because it's very acceptable, or social media, or any of the other things that we have addictions to, I just have to reiterate, you are only as sick as your secret. And it is so important to get vulnerable and to share your truth with somebody else. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's the bravest thing you can do. And asking for help is not a cop out, and it's not a lazy man's game. It takes courage and gumption because then you actually have to do something about it. And you have to allow that help in. But that's why I call my program the Big Ask Method, because I teach people how to ask for help and then what to do next.
Awesome. So thank you for answering that, because I know that there's a lot of people who listen to this that, well, I shouldn't say I know. My assumption is, because I know many of my listeners, they're not deep in the throng of drug addiction, but we all have addictions. I have addictions, right? My social media addiction sometimes is like pretty crazy. So I'm like, oh crap, I got to turn this off. Trying to do like the Jewish thing where they just don't have any technology for the Sunday, okay, can I go a day without it? Can I keep my phone attached to the counter? So I have to use it like an old telephone that's attached to a cord. So I don't take it out and ignore my family, my children because of it. Those are all things that they're it's interesting because I don't necessarily say they're more damaging because I've never been drug addicted. I've been pornography addicted. I've been other forms of addicted. But I think some of these ignoring addictions can be damaging not just to yourself, but they're really damaging to the people around you and the people that you love if you aren't aware that that's something that try and go without it. Try and get control of yourself. And if you can't, then you should take a clue. Hey, this is out of control then. If I can't manage myself, and I talk to her, I'm like, hey, this is what I'm trying to give my phone a rest. Is it making a difference? Have you noticed a difference in me? I found out I had a lot more time. We played family games. I was like, wow, you actually do have a lot of time when you're not spending 4 hours on Instagram scrolling.
That's right.
It's amazing.
And here's the other thing though, I liked what you were saying there, and this is what I would encourage people to do. So if you just locked up my drugs in a box, or locked up my phone in a box, or locked up whatever in a box, that's white knuckling it, right? I mean, you can white knuckle it. You can keep your phone tethered to your kitchen counter if you want. But again, that's not really solving and replacing the problem. I've always said, if the fear of going out, and I'm talking about with drugs and alcohol, but you could replace social media addiction with this. If the fear of going back to that life was enough to keep me sober, I would have gotten sober a long time ago. I mean, I had friends die. I've been in the back of ambulances with friends. I'd seen it all. If that healthy fear was enough to keep me sober, then I would have just stopped. I have common sense. I know it's not a good thing to do, but I was addicted. So I couldn't. What I get in recovery, and recovery from all the things, is I love the life I have on the other side of this so much that I wouldn't give it up for anything. From my cold, dead hands, you'll pry this life out of me. That's what keeps me sober and in the light. Not the trying to white knuckle, stay away from the bad stuff, but moving towards the light, replacing it. My family and I, for the last week of summer just now, we planned basically I can't say a totally social media free weekend because I'm an influencer for a living. So it's a big part of what I do. Sometimes I have to document it, but I can document and put the phone away. We did a staycation here in Pennsylvania. We did a canoe ride on Saturday. We camped out in our backyard. We did horseback riding on Sunday, and we just got reconnected with each other and the earth and nature. It does take a bit of work, but replacing the things that are keeping you mentally addicted with something that is really larger spiritually and pleasurable and it creates those positive mental connections is very important, right? Because you want to be moving towards something, not trying to keep yourself away from something else.
Yep, totally agree. I couldn't agree more with that. So that's kind of the another question. We're going to run out of time, which is just absolutely terrible. Oh, we have 2 minutes left. What do I ask?
It's the best one.
I know. Well, let's talk about this because I think this is a good one to end on. So when you said try to help others, what was the experience that happened while you were at work? Because I think that sometimes we get our head above water and we're just so thrilled about that our head's above water. And then we start showing up differently. We start getting all these changes. And the people that we had previously associated with, they start noticing the changes. Some of them are not happy about the changes because you're leaving them behind. Some of them are, they're not happy. They're, in my book, I have the 9 pillars to build a meaningful legacy. And the first one is the haters, right? We all kind of understand the haters. I still think we should be loving towards the haters and understand that they're hating us because they hate themselves. And I don't mean that in a super negative 100%. Way, but they don't believe in themselves. And so then they think, well, if I can't do it, then you shouldn't do it either, And so it's that type of hate. And we just use the word haters because that's the term. Anyways. But the second one is actually your believers. Like, you need to build a meaningful legacy for your believers because there's a big difference between somebody who's believing in you and supporting you and shouting it out for you, but they're still sitting on the sideline, completely not believing in themselves that they can do it. And it's just so funny. You're like, man, you believe in me, but you're sitting there not believing in you. And not the only reason, obviously I'm doing it for me too, but one of the big reasons I am who I am and I keep constantly progressing is because I'm looking at my children, I'm looking at my wife and saying, hey, how can we as a family progress? Not how can I progress, but how can we as a family progress? But if all they are is supporting or believing, but they don't ever see it as a future for themselves, that's a problem. So what I'm curious about is you're in this corporate career, you start seeing, okay, I've made it out, I'm happy. All my colleagues, they're actually miserable. I didn't know they were miserable because I was one of the miserable little people as well. But now I'm recognizing they're miserable. They're recognizing they're miserable. What was the experience that finally was like, I can help these people? What was there in a conversation, an experience that finally the penny dropped? You're like, I can actually help these people.
People started asking me in quiet moments. At that point, I was the SVP of this agency. We were representing brands like McDonald's in Chicago and here, there, everywhere. So I was like on a lot of business trips with these people. And there would just be moments where, we'd be sitting having dinner or whatever. And they'd say like, yeah, I don't know, Jamie. I mean, I'm kind of like at the same place as you. We're both doing the damn thing. We're making like pretty good money. We have the job. We kind of have everything we thought we always wanted, like living in New York. I'm unhappy, but you don't look unhappy. Like, how do you do it? Those questions started actually coming up. And as people started reaching out their hand, I was there to reach back. A big part of like 12-step stuff is like, you go from being, it's not a me-centered program, it's a we-centered program. And it might sound cheesy, but it ain't, because that's what it is. Like we only keep what we have by giving it away. I can't force somebody else to get it. And by the way, I'm not trying. Like, I'm not interested in that. My own sponsor used to say to me like, Jamie, I'll go out on a limb for you as far as you'll go for yourself. I'll meet you out there, but I'm not going to like come out on a limb and like try to, rip you out. Like, you got to meet me out here. If people are ready and willing to change, I've got you, right? You can't force people to get it. You can't. But when people are miserable enough, they'll be moved to change. Or if you just kind of wear your recovery like a loose cloak, right? Wear your new sensibility like your outer garment. It's not showy. We talk about attraction rather than promotion, right? I'm not out here promoting my way of life. I mean, I am now because it's a business. I'm a coach, but technically speaking, right? I mean, you can opt into that if you like, but technically speaking, I'm not out there trying to convert people, right? Proselytizing. It's attraction. People want what you have. They're going to ask how you got it. And that's the best thing you could do is just be that beacon of light and wait for people to want to get in on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that's why I figured your answer would be something like that. But I think that that's so crucial because some people miss their gifts. They miss what God blessed them with because of and I'm going to call it an addiction to false humility. It's really ego and pride masquerading as humility. When we are asked these questions in a quiet moment, sincere, hey, how are you who you are? And I find myself doing this sometimes, like, oh, I'm not really that good because you want to publicly seem like you have problems in your life too, so it's attainable. But the truth is, no, my life is actually really freaking good. And I love pretty much all my life. So when we're thinking about this, what does that look like? Well, when somebody asks you those questions, that's a sign of, in my opinion, a gift that you've been given that if you're willing to share, not everybody's willing, but if you're willing to share, that could be a good indication of a direction that you could take your life, and you would be happier sharing that and they would be happier receiving it. So with that being said, that's our kids knocking on the door. So we are so grateful for you, Jamie. And say again where we can find you if we wanted to on the podcast or find you outside the podcast.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm NYC Fit Fam. You can find my coaching program at thebigaskmethod.com. And you can find me as a keynote speaker at meetjamiehess.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me. And if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.